Welcome to the High Museum. It's good to see so many of you here tonight, new people and a lot of really good friends, so thank you for coming out. My name is Virginia Shearer. I'm the Associate Chair of Education here at the High Museum, and most of the time you probably see me introducing the speaker. But tonight I'm going to talk to you about a favorite piece of mine in the Louvre Atlanta exhibition. This is part of a series of programs that we developed in conjunction with the Louvre exhibition called Masterpiece of the Month. And I know many of you have been here to hear our staff talk about objects that they like a lot. And really the idea is to talk about it in a broad way, in a way that lets you know what's interesting about the object to us, and hopefully opens up your eyes a little bit more about the object and gets you into the galleries to take a closer look. So hopefully after this presentation tonight, you will all want to spend a little bit of time with a beautiful bust of Marie Antoinette. Before I go on, I have to thank a special person who made this presentation possible, and that's Sherry Kashani. She is a very bright young woman who is in the Emory Art History program, and in the midst of a very tough senior thesis, worked on this presentation with me. So it's really for Sherry that I was able to put it together. So thank you, Sherry. And we'll start. This is a wonderful little piece, this bust of Marie Antoinette, which was made in 1782. And as you look at it in the slide and many of our cards that we've sent to you and in the catalog, it looks like quite a large piece, but it's actually quite small. It's only 40 centimeters high. It's a very intimate little piece, and it is an official court bust of Marie Antoinette from really the height of her reign. And it's really interesting. Tonight, what I'm going to focus primarily on is images of Marie Antoinette in her early reign and really at the height of her reign, and how there are court images and very prescribed ways that Marie Antoinette needs to be depicted as queen, and then ways that Marie Antoinette is really trying to identify herself as an individual. So we'll take a look at that. I'm particularly interested, having worked on this project for the last year, the Louvre project, and I realized tonight also that I'm particularly interested in Marie Antoinette because I'm about the same age as she is when she died, and so I think I have a little bit of extra identification with her. This bust is remarkable in so many ways. And when you look at it, you're sure that it's of someone regal for many different reasons, for the pose, for the three-quarter turn, the way she's gazing out past us, the way she seems to be involved in something otherworldly, something we couldn't possibly understand. And then there's sort of a dead giveaway here at the top, and that's this bandeau that wraps around her beautiful hair. And you'll notice as you look closely that the fleur-de-lis pattern is apparent there, as well as a tiny little diamond pattern. And the fleur-de-lis was the flower, the lily flower, that the Bourbon dynasty was famous for. And the Bourbon dynasty was the dynasty of King Louis XIV and his successors, Louis XV and Louis XVI, who Marie Antoinette marries, and the family she marries into. So this is very much a symbol of a queen. She's also got this very regal hairstyle. It's really quite stunning with these wonderful sausage curls. And as you look around the bust, and it is meant to be viewed from all sides, so squeeze in there and look at the back side, you'll see that her hair is pulled back. There's some wonderful fabric and a beautiful bow and two braids down her back. And just the attention to her hair is quite incredible. And then I think the elongation we've got here with her neck, she's just quite literally a stunning person. And this beautiful dress accents this with this wonderful lace and this bow and then this gorgeous drapery that's accented by a brooch made of pearls. And so a lot of that detail you can't tell in the photo, but when you look up close, you can really begin to see it more. This bust was made by the Svres Porcelain Factory, which is the porcelain factory that the kings were quite interested in patronizing. Porcelain was very popular in France at the time, and Louis XIV and Louis XV very much supported the Svres Porcelain Factory. And so when Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette's husband, when he inherits it, he also patronizes the factory, buying many things from them, many busts, many plaques, many table services, lots of wonderful porcelain items, and really contributing to the luxury trade that was so important to France at the time. But I know many of you out there have probably studied art and have learned a little bit about Svres, and I myself had prior to this exhibition. And so whenever I thought about Svres, I never thought about something, one color, something so quiet as this piece. I thought about things like this. This is a wonderful piece we have in the exhibition. This vase, again, is incredible and monochromatic on the bottom. It's got the three graces, just perfect goddess bodies, a wonderful garland of flowers. But then it's topped by this colorful top sort of urn that's gilded with gold and lots of individual patterning and brush strokes. And it's really quite Baroque, really quite over the top, a little bit different than our bust. And this, to me, is the typical Svres. If anything comes into my mind when I say Svres, I think of a piece like this. It is so beautiful, so stunning. It's very large. It's very colorful. And yet when you look closely, you'll notice this medallion in the center that has a very fine line drawing, painting of a suit of armor and horses receding into the background. Some of the best painters of the time would paint on porcelain for Svres. And then these angels sort of floating around, very much a period sort of piece. And all of this gold and these wonderful ear-shaped handles, which when you get closer, you'll notice they're ram's heads. And to me, this is the kind of imperial piece that really Svres is noted for. And then pieces like this. As I said, Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette's husband, was a great patron of Svres, and part of his duty was to buy many things, and he did. And so did Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette ordered a large table service of this gorgeous set. There were actually 300 pieces, and before it was to arrive, the King of Sweden visited, and so Louis XVI gave it as a diplomatic gift to the King of Sweden. So Marie Antoinette had to buy another set, and we have some of the rare surviving pieces up in the exhibition. We have this plate that belonged to the King of Sweden, and we have this soup tureen that belonged to Marie Antoinette. And again, this is very typical of when I think about the Svres style, this gold, this patterning, these tiny little brush strokes, not something as quiet and as serene as our bust of Marie Antoinette. But as you see, she's quiet but powerful. She beckons you in, and I kind of think she glows a little bit from the inside. And I like to think of it as the point in her reign where things are really beginning to change. She still has control over her image in a lot of ways, and so this kind of official bust, she would have had a hand in saying, this is good for me. I look great here. This is a good official bust for me. And so she's been able to choose probably some of the elements herself and work to make sure that this depicts her in a certain way. But it didn't start out that way, and we have to understand a little about her history to understand more about her image. Marie Antoinette was born in November of 1755 in Vienna, Austria. She was born into the Habsburg court, which was one of the most important and influential courts in Europe at the time. They were the center of politics, the center of power. She was 15 of 16 children. She was the youngest daughter of the Empress Maria Theresa and her husband Francis. She was very important. It was an extremely important family. They did, however, live somewhat different lives than the lives at Versailles, the lives of the kings of France. For example, they kept private apartments, and Marie Antoinette got to know her father very well. They spent a lot of time together. And Marie Antoinette was able to sort of pursue her own interests. So she was able to pursue things like playing with dolls. She was able to learn to dance, which she excelled at and loved to do. She was able to learn the harpsichord. And she had to learn, of course, to read and write, but those were never things that she really cared much for and never things that she was very good at. And this image of her very early on shows, a beautiful and perfect archduchess as she was. But you don't really see that there's not much intellectual stuff going on for her. So because of that, as her mother is planning lots of marriages with 16 children to marry and many alliances to make, as a powerful statesman like she was marrying her children in very strategic ways. And she was developing alliances and helping her secure the power of her country. But she never thought Marie Antoinette, I think, would pass the muster. Maybe it was the intellect, maybe it was her spirit. There's lots of things that are written. But she never really thought she would use Marie Antoinette in that way. And so Marie Antoinette is able to, sort of pursue her own interests and kind of have a sort of independence for that time. But then the 7 Years' War happens, and Maria Theresa realizes that she must strengthen ties with France. And so she begins to talk to Louis XV, the King of France, about marrying his future king, his grandson, to Marie Antoinette. And so it's at this time in 1770 that Marie Antoinette is engaged to the future King of France, Louis Auguste. Image was extremely important to everyone at the court of Versailles in France. And it was extremely important to Louis XV that his future grandson marry a polished, refined, beautiful, bright, wonderful girl who would later become the queen. And we don't have any images because I think this would be kind of fun for those of you who watch the before and after shows. But the way they describe poor little 13-year-old Marie Antoinette, she needed an extreme makeover. This is a picture after that makeover is made. But basically she had very unruly curls. They had to be brought under control. And so a Parisian hairdresser was brought to Vienna to teach her about hairstyling and to work on her curls, get things back in order. We can't see her poor little teeth, but they underwent a lot of reconstruction. They were crooked and spaces and all kinds of things. And I think I saw 2 teenagers out in the audience, so we can feel the pain, having probably had braces. This poor woman had to have a lot of teeth reconstruction without any kind of anesthesia. And she also had to really learn how to walk again. So I think it must have been interesting for someone who loved to dance and loved to move. She had one of the most important dancers, a legendary dancer from Paris, come to the court and help her learn how to move gracefully in court attire. So in a very tight corset and a very heavy gown and a cape and very high heels. And then a painter came along as well, so it was an entire entourage. And that painter, Joseph Ducroix, painted a series of paintings that let us know that before and after, not the before, mostly the after, and really documented the transformation. So this is an image from that time that would have been sent back to Louis XV, so he knew that the bargain he was entering into was going to be a good one for the King of France. And as she prepared for her trip to Versailles, now that she was physically complete, physically transformed into the swan that she needed to be, they began to work on her dress. It was a less formal attire at the Habsburg court. Paris is the height of fashion, still is, was then. And so Marie Antoinette begins to work with stylists and designers and dressmakers directly from Paris who are there to help outfit her like a queen. And so every garment that she would have owned at this point would have been Parisian, and they spent lots and lots of money on this. In fact, by today's standards, records say it would have been between $20 and $30 million that they would have spent. And by 1770, by the spring, she's ready. She's ready to go to France. She's ready to enter into this marriage. And so she leaves in a carriage, and she travels to the edge of France, and she meets many of the members of the French court who will now become a part of her daily life in the middle of the Rhine River on neutral territory. And she goes through a ceremony called a remise, which was a handover ceremony, basically. So this way, the country of Austria is giving up a favored daughter to the favored son of France. And Marie Antoinette, in the giving over, has to relinquish everything on her person that came from Austria. So she relinquishes her favorite pet. She relinquishes her jewelry, even things her mother gave her. And she relinquishes all of her clothing. Although it's made in Paris and of the latest fashion, she's stripped bare and inspected and found to be beautiful in every way and redressed and then taken back to the court of Versailles, the most important court. And it's very imposing, as you can imagine. There are standards of behavior and standards of dress. And as I said, if you can't even walk the way you'd like to walk, it must have been quite a little fishbowl for her. But she goes, and she meets her future husband, Louis XVI, who's just 15, and they get married in the chapel at Versailles. And they have a very hard time from the onset of their marriage. They have a very difficult time. They cannot consummate their marriage. We know today that Louis XVI was very shy, that he was very much a loner and socially awkward, and that he was also living in fear of his own, of Austria. He had been raised by a tutor who was not for France and Austria coming together, and so he was very nervous. And so they spend a long time trying to figure this out. And in fact, 7 years pass before they're able to have a child. And this is very difficult for Marie Antoinette, and it's embarrassing, and it's mostly detrimental to her character and to her standing and really to her position in general, because it was Marie Antoinette's job and her only job, besides looking good, looking the part and being the part, it was to have a male heir for France and to carry on the Bourbon dynasty, and it's something that she's not able to do. And so this period of time is the period that I find particularly interesting, because this is when Marie Antoinette begins to play around with fashion, and she begins to try her hand at different things that are of interest to her, but also playing around a little bit with that power. And so this is a royal portrait that's quite different than our bust. It's so colorful and wonderful. Also, I think you'll notice she gazes a little more directly at us in this wonderfully inquisitive way. And this portrait is really filled with symbols. The more you look at it, the more you begin to understand how royal of a portrait it is. Now, little things I've learned are that just the average you and me could have never worn this sort of corset, not only because we're probably not small enough, but because only the most important ladies at the court could wear the tightest corsets. That was very important. She also wears this very imposing, voluminous dress, and then you'll see this cape that follows the line of her dress. Now, when you go into the Louvre Atlanta exhibition, you'll see some large banners of the kings, Louis XIV, Louis XV, and Louis XVI. And you'll see that they are all wearing a similar cape, a royal cape. And it has the fleur-de-lis, the symbol we saw on her crown, in the bust. And it's lined with ermine, which is a special fur that really the kings and the queens wear. And you'll also notice in this portrait that just peeking around the corner is the crown here on top of a pillow, wonderful pillow with a fleur-de-lis. And then there are two flowers, types of flowers that are combining. The rose, which was a symbol of the Habsburg court where Marie Antoinette comes from Austria, and was her favorite flower. And then the lily, which is the fleur-de-lis, which is the Bourbon court's favorite flower. There's also an open book, so we're to get the idea that she was very educated, like a queen would be. And her hand on top of this globe here, very worldly. So this is a very prescribed image. This is the kind of image that everyone would see and would know right offhand. She was Queen of France. She had it all. And she probably had very little to do with how this is all put together. But she begins to want to, and I'm sorry that this is the blurry slide in the bunch, she begins to really want to take control over how she appears and her image in general. And so at this time she meets a dealer of fashion, a marchand du monde. And that woman's name is Rose Bertin. And this person, I think, is particularly fascinating. She was a young entrepreneur. She was working in Paris. She was working in the latest fashion. And Marie Antoinette takes her on and really wants to have everything made by Rose Bertin. So she's sort of the Coco Chanel of her day. And Rose Bertin is a smart woman. She is an entrepreneur, so she knows if she does a good job for Marie Antoinette, well, she's going to be popular. And so she does. She becomes the person who helps Marie Antoinette achieve her looks, and she also becomes quite wealthy for her time. This is a beautiful example of a surviving gown that was created by Rose Bertin in 1780. There are very few of them because they weren't signed like an artist would do today, and also because the fabrics, would have broken down over time. But this one does survive, and I thought this was a particularly nice image to show you because it also exemplifies some of Marie Antoinette's taste. So as Rose Bertin is making things for Marie Antoinette, she is also working the system, and she's working for other people, and she's selling Marie Antoinette's style to the rest of Paris and the rest of the court of Versailles because everyone wanted to look like the queen. So you'll see this beautiful dress with these wonderful little flowers embroidered in them. Marie Antoinette loved floral patterns. She loved pastels. She, in particular, loved pinks and greens and violets. So this kind of speaks to her taste in a lot of ways. And Marie Antoinette loved shoes. And these are some very fun shoes. You get the idea about the high heels here. And also there's no straps that hold them on. The kitten heel and the mule were very popular. And there's tiny little shoes here. Marie Antoinette loved shoes, and probably part of the reason she loved shoes is because she was so, she did trust Rose Bertin. And Rose Bertin is really the person who is credited with understanding the accessory. So for the very first time, women begin to understand that a shoe can make an outfit, even though people can't see it, and we'll look at that more. They just poke out of the dresses. But their accessories are incredibly important to creating that final look, that final image that you want. And Rose Bertin understands that a hairstyle also makes a difference. And so she and a friend of hers, a hairdresser named Monsieur Léonard, get together and they create a hairstyle called the pouf. And this hairstyle becomes all the rage because Marie Antoinette immediately loves it, adopts it, wears it, and then everyone has to have it. And the pouf is a really elaborate, really kind of crazy thing. It is made out of a scaffolding of wire. There's cloth and gauze inside that sort of fills it out. And there's fake hair when you don't have enough hair to cover it. And they become really kind of a craze and somewhat out of control. Some women need to have, the taller the pouf, the better, so they get to be about 3 feet high. They make sleeping difficult. They make getting in a carriage difficult. They make it very difficult to do many physical things. And I think what's most kind of controversial about them is not just that they were frivolous and silly, but they were also a way for women to express themselves. So women began to use the pouf as a way to send a message out. So in this image, you see women who are wearing what would be thought of as the sentimental pouf. So sentimental pouf is just a feeling or an expression. So these women are wearing spring flowers and pearls. These are a little more regal and sort of refined. But if you were really happy about the spring, you might wear a number of flowers cascading out of your hair. Or if you're Marie Antoinette, you might wear a special occasion pouf. So a special occasion pouf is an opportunity for Marie Antoinette to sort of play at politics and for other women to do so at the time. So in this case, Marie Antoinette is sending a direct message to us that she is all for France and the American revolutionaries fighting and defeating England. And she's sending that message out as wide and as far as she can, because her pouf is very tall and you can see her in the room. And you can see a sort of recreation of this in our exhibition that's quite wonderful. But this gets Marie Antoinette into a little bit of hot water because it's considered very frivolous, because so many women want to emulate her, and because in order to do that, women begin to borrow money. They begin to start taking things on credit. So merchants like Rose Bertin offer credit where they never had been before. People go into debt. And then there's rumors that people take on lovers and that people are spending dowries in order to get the money to be on the same level as Marie Antoinette or as close as they can be. And Marie Antoinette begins to be blamed for these things. So her image is somewhat out of control. But she doesn't look out of control in court portraiture. So this is the flip side of that. A satirical cartoon and a court image in a wonderful pastel dress with her flowers, with the crown here in the corner, with her wearing a slightly more subdued pouf and some ostrich feathers that she was very fond of. And then, of course, with the king sort of hanging over her shoulder. So Marie Antoinette doesn't really know much about these pamphlets and cartoons at the time. They're kept away from her, but her image is sort of out of control. She thinks she's got it under control, but she doesn't really. And then she's made a gift of her own estate. Versailles is very large, for those of you who've been here, and you can tuck away whole villages there, and that's just what they did. And they had this wonderful home, little country estate called Petit Trianon, and that's given to Marie Antoinette by her husband, the king. And so Marie Antoinette begins to build her own world here. She's still unable to produce an heir at this time. She's still under a lot of court pressure in the realm that she understands. And she knows that she's not making the grade by having a son. And so as she's fighting back a little bit with fashion, she also begins to just retreat into this private world. And so she makes new friends and she invites them to be part of her personal court. Out at Versailles, she doesn't invite the people she doesn't care for or the people that cause her displeasure. And at Versailles, they can do many things, at Trianon, they can do many things they can't do at Versailles. They famously stay up all night and watch the sunrise. They just spend time together at parties very late into the evening. There's gambling, all sorts of things. And Marie Antoinette is in charge, so much so that at Trianon you must do things by order of the queen, which is unheard of because there's only by order of the king. And so she has her own little court. And it's a wonderful place for those of you who have not visited or would like to visit. I just got to go last fall, and it's a gorgeous neoclassical building. It was actually built for Louis XV's mistress, Madame Pompadour, and yet it really speaks of the time when Marie Antoinette lived there because she furnished it in wonderfully simple furnishings, and she took away what were very formal gardens and simplified them and begins to emulate more of an English garden aesthetic. And in addition to the English garden aesthetic, she and having her friends with her, she begins to set this sort of environment of ease around her. So they play at Trianon. They don't play at Versailles. Everything's quite serious and it's regimented. But at Trianon, she's able to milk cows and work in the garden and watch the livestock grow and do lots of things that would have been unheard of, and basically play at having a farm without having any of the responsibilities that the common people would have had. And Marie Antoinette decides that the fashions at Versailles are too constricting. And as you can imagine her in one of those glorious gowns trying to milk a cow, that probably wouldn't have worked. So she establishes with Rose Bertin, her coach, her dealer of fashions, she establishes a new kind of dress. It's a simplified, very simple dress. You'll notice that there is no corset, and this is very liberating for her. Beautiful sashes and fabrics. Of course, it's still lovely. The hair is much more simple, and simple straw hats. And so this is the sort of dress that she orders all of her friends and all of the visitors to Trianon to wear. They're not to wear court attire. They're not to behave like they do at Versailles, but instead they are to become a part of Marie Antoinette's world and look the part and be the part. And this may have been okay if Marie Antoinette had sort of kept this all to Trianon. I think it may have been okay if she had invited some friends and enemies closer, but she did choose to be exclusive. And so there's rumors and people's feelings are hurt, and there's a lot of sort of backlash against her. And then she does the kind of unthinkable. She allows her favorite artist, her court portraitist, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, to paint this painting and to display it at the Louvre in the Paris Salon. So there for all of the public to see, because they're public hours at the time, people can come and visit, they get to see the Queen in this state of undress. They get to see the Queen without any of the symbols of the Queen, without a globe, without a book, without a crown. And she looks just like any other woman might, any peasant woman might, any common woman might. And particularly scandalous, although it's hard for us to understand now because this looks like a spring or summer dress, is this dress. It looks to people on the outside world who are not personal friends that she's wearing something that she should be wearing in the bedroom, that she's wearing something that should be covered up like a slip. And so this is scandalous. And she quickly tries to take control again of her image, and she has Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun paint her in a beautiful gown. So if we flip back, you'll see it's really essentially the same pose, very similar gesture in the hands. She's holding a rose, her favorite flower, and the symbol of the monarchy, and Habsburg monarchy. But she is in this very courtly dress, very typically Versailles. She's wearing wonderful, beautiful jewelry. Her hair, again, is done up in a very elaborate hairstyle with her signature ostrich feathers. So again, we're comfortable because she's the Queen. And so this image quickly replaces the other, and that way the public can see the Queen again in the way that they expect to see her. But they don't forget. The image of the Queen in this sort of country dress is seared into people's brains. And so years later, when Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, they've lost the PR campaign of their reign. They have lost it, and they are really grasping for what will save them and how to save the monarchy. So they attempt to escape France, to sort of regroup and to get back with their Austrian friends and collaborators, and then come back to France to put down the French Revolution. And they're caught dressed as commoners. And so then many images in pamphlets and other revolutionary images are let out all over so that all of France can know what a terrible thing the King and Queen did. And what's interesting is, although she was dressed, in darker clothing and not dressed at all in this way, the artists often depict her in the kind of dress she would have worn at Trianon, because they know that the public will easily identify her with this image. So, taking a little bit of a look at those different ways of depicting Marie Antoinette, I think it's important to come back to our beautiful bust of Marie Antoinette in the exhibition. She experimented with fashion. She understood that it had a lot of power. She understood that she could use it in many ways. And then she also didn't understand how it could be used against her. So it's very interesting to think about over time how her image is tarnished by many of her choices that really are the kinds of choices we make all the time, but because we don't live in that sort of constricting environment, we can almost not really understand how just to choose your own dress, to choose your own behavior would cause such unrest, but it did. And so that's a little bit about her life. I can't tell you everything tonight because I could keep you here for 6 months, but there are many things to learn, and of course afterwards I can answer any questions, and there are many things to read, but I'd like to focus particularly on our piece, and I've talked to you a little bit about how serene and how beautiful it is, but it's also important to understand, I think, how it's made and to understand a little bit more about its function. The bust is made out of biscuitware, which again was a porcelain. It was a very fine porcelain, a technique that was developed at Sèvres in 1751. And biscuitware was a highly polished form of porcelain. It's twice fired, and it is not glazed, so there's never any color. And it's actually a word in French, biscuit, that means twice baked. So that translates over into English. And this sort of technique was ideal for small statuettes like this that could be used as diplomatic gifts and that could be used and traded and could be mass-produced, because the pieces were originally, there's a mold that's made by a master, and then the artisans at Sèvres, because it was a factory, would then be able to create many other copies of the mold, so that they had a sort of factory line or mass production line. The master who created this piece was Louis-Simon Boiseau, and Boiseau was a wonderful artist who became the head of the sculpture studio at Sèvres. He studied at the Royal Academy in Paris. He won the Prix de Rome, which was and still is a very top prize and coveted prize for artists. Today, he's considered more of a craftsman, than a fine artist. He's not a Bernini or one of those whose names we would just automatically recognize. But in France, there are many pieces that survive, and he did a great job at small pieces, and especially pieces with a lot of detail like this. He paid a lot of attention to hair and clothing, and was a favorite of Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. He ended up producing over 150 busts of them during his lifetime, and lots of other small ornamental things at Sèvres. This particular piece, I think, also has a very interesting story to the Louvre. It came into the Louvre collection in 1982. And so that means it was made in 1782, and it came into the collection in 1982. Where was it for all of this time? It was actually in the home of a Russian family, where it had been since it had been made. And the way the story goes, early in the 20th century, there was a dealer who was called to the home of a family named Kurakin. And the Kurakin family was trying to identify the artist of this piece. They were sure it was Marie Antoinette from family legend, but they were trying to identify the artist. And so lots of comparisons are made, and I'll show you a little bit of that. And they eventually result in us knowing that Boiseau was the artist. But there's a little legend that I think adds to this mystery, because I'm quite sure she's looking away from us and thinking deep thoughts, but she's also got something, else going on. And according to the family, Marie Antoinette and Prince Kurakin met in Versailles in 1782 when he accompanied the Tsar for a season at Versailles. And he fell deeply in love with her. And so she gave him this sculpture as a gift and a token of her feelings for him. Now, this isn't documented. This is family legend, and wouldn't we all like to say? But they did have the bust, and like Antiques Roadshow, when you have something in your family, you can say whatever you want. But we do know from the Svres Porcelain Factory, which has really great records, that Prince Kurakin did indeed order a bust of Marie Antoinette that spring, as well as a bust of Louis XVI. Louis, unfortunately, we don't know what happened to him. And this is another example because in looking at lots of different busts, just so I could love ours, I think, a little bit more, I had to look at other pieces by Boiseau, and this is a marble bust. So it is, just as elaborate, just as rich. I don't think it glows in quite the same way. And yet we're sure, and we know that when they were trying to identify the artist of the Kurakin piece, our piece, that they looked at many, many portraits by Boiseau, and they noticed many details, like the way that her face, the way she's facing in this three-quarter turn, the hairstyle, the elaborate headdress, the elongated neck and the bust and the drapery. And then when you get to the back, this is sort of what I was talking about with our piece, you'll see this elaborate fabric and braiding down her hair. But when you look at the Louvre piece that we have, and the piece that is also in the Louvre collection, that they have was one of the pieces they used to compare, you'll see some real differences as well. You'll see that her headdress is actually a tiara here, and the piece we have from the Louvre is this simple bandeau. You'll see this ermine-lined cape that I talked about in her state portrait, and the fleur-de-lis. And you'll also see that her dress is so much more elaborate. I also think, and maybe, just in looking, you get the same feeling, she's much more imperious in this other piece from the Louvre. She doesn't seem to have that sort of softness, and her eyebrow seems a little raised in our piece. So, I feel that she's missing that element of inquisitiveness, that little mystery. She looks much more Roman to me and much more reserved. I think our piece shares a lot of similarity with how she liked to have herself depicted in the more relaxed and more naturalistic way, in the kind of country setting. I like to imagine that she would have wanted something, especially if there was a romance with Kurakin, which there probably wasn't, but she would have wanted this as a gift to a friend as opposed to this really formal sort of depiction. And it's just so interesting to see so many of pieces of her over time. So I encourage you, if you can, to look at other pieces along the line. But I also encourage you to look at our piece really closely. Go into the galleries, look at all the wonderful Sev pieces, and then wait for that piece to call out for you. She's in a corner, and she'll pull you in and ask you to take a look. And I think you'll find that this is, although a court portrait, it is definitely a portrait of a young woman who knows how she wants to be depicted. So I hope that you have enjoyed learning a little bit more. It's not her entire life. It's so long and so rich. And so definitely learn more about her, and definitely look in the galleries. Look closely, because the more you look, the more sort of details emerge and the more things you can find. So thank you. Take any questions.
Right here. Yeah, we'll take some questions, and just so you know, we need you to speak into the microphone because this lecture is being filmed. So,
I'm sorry I got here a little bit late, but the movie indicated that her husband kind of liked boys, and was that not true?
Oh, that's funny. Well, there's no documentation that I've read about that. He did have troubles physically with women, but I haven't ever read that he liked boys. In fact, everything I've ever read about him says that he loved her immensely. They grew up, as these teenagers together, and they were experiencing all of these kinds of things, and he treated her unlike other kings, and this is something I didn't go into because there's so many directions to go, but King Louis XIV and King Louis XV, his grandfather and then great-grandfather, they both kept many mistresses and had many great loves, and they gave them estates, and they set them up in so many ways, let them spend lots of money, and really Louis XVI treats Marie Antoinette as his only love, and he says very early on that he won't take on a mistress. So I kind of like to think of it as a great love of some kind.
Virginia, I saw that movie too, but I've read the two biographies, Antonia Fraser and Caroline Weber, who was here during the month of March. And he was everything you said, and a little sexually dysfunctional, which he was cured because I think his grandfather, one died of smallpox, the other died of syphilis, so he was scared. I mean, But anyway, back to Marie. She's the Mona Lisa of sculpture, French sculpture. And the reason being her enigmatic smile. I've just been to the dentist myself, so I was looking. But anyway, she's got the Habsburg lip, which is very, very unique. And costly as it may be, see that Habsburg lip? Even in the other bust, it indicates that. So it's very discernible. But happily, I bought the 6-inch little porcelain, no, it's not porcelain, it's bisque, in the gift shop. It's costly, but it is worth it. I have her mounted somewhere under my Venetian mirror, but on top of all her books. And she's a constant study, fashionista as she is. And but thank you. Tonight was very elucidating. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you. It's funny that Dottie says that because, a lot of historians that we've met over the year and talking with Caroline Weber, who came in March and wrote a book, Queen of Fashion, that's extraordinary. And there were, in addition to the movie, there were 2 other books that came out this year. There was Queen of Fashion, which is more historical and very well documented. And there was another book called Abundance, which is a fun read. On the weekend, it's historical fiction, and the author is Sina Gina Naslund. And that's a very fun book, so you can get a little bit of history and get your sort of candy as well. But, many historians don't care for Marie Antoinette because she was frivolous, because she was like a grown-up teenager. And I don't know why, but I guess having read so much about her, I just feel like She's a lot like Madame Pompadour before her, and she's a lot, as you learn about Josephine, the Empress Josephine, Napoleon's wife, she's a lot like Josephine as well. And it's really about independent spirit for me and why I admire her. But I think that may have been what was really hard for the French to understand, because there wasn't such a thing as independent spirit if you were a royal.
Okay, do we have one more question before we leave for the evening? All right, thank you, Virginia. Thank you all for coming tonight.